I have no products to plug and I have no items to sell. Today we are at the Calvary Cemetery here in Toledo, Ohio. I'm going to visit the grave of Eileen Adams. She was a 14-year-old girl who was murdered over 55 years ago. Her murder changed the trajectory of her family's lives forever. December 18th, 1967, Christmas is only a week away, and for one 14-year-old Eileen Adams, it's just any ordinary day, except Christmas is almost here. She was a student at Catholic Central High School, not very far from where we're currently at right now. Now, on school days, when Eileen would get out of school, she would ride a city bus over to the corners of Sylvania and Kelly. She would get off at that bus stop and she would walk a couple blocks to her older sister's house, where she would wait there until her father came home from work and picked her up. They lived outside of Toledo in an area where there was no bus service. So on that day, she gets off of the bus and she proceeds to walk towards her sister's home. She never arrived there. Now, her sister is probably wondering where she's at. Maybe she is at the friend's house, whatever. Father gets to the daughter's home and he says, "Where's Eileen?" She says she's never showed up. They call the school, they call some of her friends, and now they're calling the police. And later on that night, they're probably looking at the door, waiting for it to open. Eileen comes waltzing through. "Oh, sorry, I was at my friend's house. We were listening to records or watching TV, and I lost track of time." "Oh, okay, well, you worried your mother and me, now you're grounded." That's the perfect scenario in a case such as that, but that would not happen. It would be 5 worrisome weeks towards the end of January 1968, about maybe 15 miles or so north of here, over the border in Michigan, in White Fork Township. 2 guys are on their property and they notice that something smells. It's coming from that direction. And as they get closer and closer and closer, they see what looks to be a dead body. And they run like hell out of there. They go back to the house, they get on the phone, and they call the police. And the police come out there, and yes, they confirm that it is a decomposing body. The body was tied up with some kind of cord around her ankles, around her wrist, and around her neck. She was tied up in a way to where if she would have straightened out her legs, she would be choking herself. They take the body to the coroner's office for autopsy, and they do identify the remains of that of 14-year-old Eileen Adams. Now, they discovered during the autopsy that the cause of death was repeated blows from probably a hammer to the skull, that it was in fact so hard that she was hit with this blunt instrument that it split her skull in half. And there was also a nail that was driven in her skull. Her dress was covered in what appeared to be dog hair, white dog hair. Other than that, I'm pretty sure they took some kind of fingerprints and they have nothing. Now, I'm pretty sure you guys watch The First 48 Hours, and I've watched that show before too, and I do recall in the beginning of the program's intro, it says that if a case is not solved within the first 48 hours, that in so many words, that it lowers the percentage of it being solved possibly by half, maybe even more. The point is, when something like that happens, time is of the essence for that case to be solved, to bring the murderer or murderers to justice. Now, there really is no evidence, and there is no DNA. They don't know what that is. And the homicide detectives here in Toledo, as the months turn into years, they start getting new homicides that they have to investigate, and Eileen's case file starts going into the back of the filing cabinet. Now you fast forward, I want to say maybe 14 years. So December 5th or so, 1981, Toledo, Ohio Police Department, desk sergeant on duty, doing whatever paperwork. This woman comes in and she says, I want to talk to a detective or somebody in charge, whatever. They said, what is this concerning? She says, I want to talk about that unsolved murder of the Adams girl back from 1967. And they say, okay. So they bring her back and they said, what do you want to tell us? And she says, I know who killed her. It was my husband, Robert Bowman. And they said, well, how do you know your husband killed her? So this is basically the story of what she told them. She says, I'm at home. At the time, the family lived on the 2200 block of Sylvania Avenue. I couldn't find the exact address, but they lived very, very close to where Eileen's sister lived. Literally about a block away on the same street. So she's at home and she hears something like coming from the basement. Like it sounds like scratching or scurrying. At first she ignored it because she thought it was just rats. But it kept doing it, and it didn't sound like rats. It sounded like something heavier than a rat. So she goes downstairs to the basement, and in the basement, they have oftentimes a cellar, a separate room in the basement. She opens the door to the cellar, and when she opens it, she sees this girl totally nude. And her arms are tied to the wall like this, both of her arms, like it's like a cross, like a Jesus Christ type pose. She has some kind of tape over her mouth and she's trying to scream. This woman immediately screams for her life and she runs upstairs. The wife of Robert Bowman, her name was Margaret. Margaret runs upstairs and she runs right into Robert. And he says, look what you did now. Now I gotta kill her. So he walks right past her and he tells her, you stay right there. He goes down to the basement and all she remembers him doing is turning a radio on very loudly. Finally, he comes back upstairs and he says, if you say anything about this to anybody, not only am I going to kill you, I'm going to kill our daughter too. They just had a newborn baby girl. I don't want to say it's a newborn, but it was a baby girl. So he forces Margaret to go with him over to White Fork Township, right across the border in Michigan, and dump her body. So one of the first questions that the detective is going to ask her is, by any chance, did you have any pets? And she said, yeah, at the time we had a white dog. Remember what I said about the white dog hair that was found all over Eileen's clothes when they found her? Well, that detail wasn't leaked out to the newspapers or the TV. So that would have been impossible for her to know that fact about the crime scene. I'm gonna guess that the detectives all of a sudden are believing this woman. Now, this woman is a little bit inebriated, a little bit drunk. She's been drinking the whole day, but she swears up and down, I'm telling you the truth. And they ask her, well, if this is true, why the hell did you wait 14 years to call the police and tell her? And she simply said, I was scared. He said he was going to kill me. I stayed with him for another 10 years or so until I saved up enough money where I could leave him and grab our daughter and come back to Toledo. It was only, you know, her boyfriend at the time who every time she would drink, she would tell him what she's seen. And finally the boyfriend got tired of this story and he says, you need to go to the damn police to tell them what you know. Okay, so now we're looking for Robert Bowman. Now, he does have a bit of an arrest record. This was a photo taken of him when he was arrested back in 1962. Not quite sure what that arrest was for, but it probably wasn't anything major because Robert Bowman was not on anybody's radar at the time. Now, when he was living in Toledo, Ohio, he worked as some kind of a contractor for a construction company. Now, the last thing they knew of Robert Bowman, or that she knew of him, was that he had moved down to the South Florida area and he became some kind of a salesman for expensive handbags, where they would manufacture the handbags and then he would sell them to department stores like Saks Fifth Avenue, so forth and so on, Neiman Marcus. And he was quite successful. He was making very good money down in the Miami area. However, 2 months later, after Margaret goes into the police department to tell them what they know, they go down to Florida, or they have some detectives from Miami go down to Florida, and they went to go find him. And he was no longer a successful businessman, but nobody but a crazed homeless man that lived in this abandoned business that it used to be some kind of a bar or a restaurant. This place, when they found it, when they started asking around, asking people if they knew who he was, some of the cops said, yeah, I know who that guy is. He sleeps in this business down the street. We stopped him before, but he told us that the owner lets him live there. In exchange, he keeps an eye on the property and he keeps it clean, and then they pay him a couple bucks a week. So they go to the property, and when they go in, this place is filthy, it's disgusting, it's a hovel. And then they shine their flashlights, and all of a sudden, out comes this man looking all tattered with this beard, looking disheveled, looking like he hasn't bathed in a while, and he's wearing all white. So they say, hey, are you Robert Bowman? And he said, yeah. He says, well, we want to talk to you about a murder that occurred in Toledo, Ohio. And he says, okay, that's fine, but watch your step, because the cockroaches are my friends and you might step on them. So he goes back to his part of the restaurant where he sleeps at, this little room, and there's a bunch of rats that are waiting for him because he's feeding them. He said, the rats are my friends too. There's like 7 or 8 of them, and I have to feed them before I go down to talk to you guys. He feeds the rats, and then they proceed to take him down to the station. Now, over the course of 2 days, several hours of them interviewing Robert Bowman, he's denying anything to do with the murder. And the only thing he's really talking about is religion. He's talking about weird pyramids, weird beams of light, all kinds of crazy, like, just nonsense. They're repeatedly asking him, do you know anything about the murder of Eileen Adams? And he says, no, of course not. I could never do anything like that. I'm a religious man. My religion would not allow me to do such a thing. Okay. Well, they don't really have, they have enough evidence to arrest him, but they don't have enough evidence, they feel, to convict him. At least that's what the prosecutor says. Yeah, you got the white dog hair. Yeah, you got the cooperation of the ex-wife who says that she's seen this girl tied up, you know, screaming for her life. But this woman is what a lot of people would call a flaky character witness, because she's a known alcoholic. And why would a normal person see a nude teenage girl tied up in her basement and not call the police? Well, That was back in January of 1981. Excuse me, 1982. So the case kind of gets forgotten about. There's just not enough evidence to proceed with a case against him. The detectives feel that he's responsible. They do believe Margaret Bowman. There's no evidence. So you fast forward some years later, I think it's 2006 now, and Eileen's father, this man has, you know, he's older now and he's very sick, and he runs into, I guess, a police officer, an off-duty police officer, something like that. And he says, you know, my daughter was murdered, you know, over 40 years ago, almost 40 years ago. Is there any new news yet? And, well, the detective is like, yeah, well, you know, they kind of forgot about it because it happened so long ago. So they go back into the files and they start looking over everything, and Robert Bowman, white dog hair. This guy's crazy. So they finally say, you know what, we forgot about it, but now we have new DNA technology. So what they do is they contact, I believe, they contact the daughter of Robert Bowman, the one that he threatened to kill if the wife revealed what he was doing. So they get the DNA from his daughter. Don't quote me 100% sure, but I'm fairly certain it was the daughter who they got the DNA from. The DNA matches the DNA that was found on the dress. Bingo. Now they got him. Okay, now we have enough evidence to charge him with the murder. But where is he? Nobody knows where he's at. So they put him on America's Most Wanted, where he's profiled there. I believe in 2006 that episode came up, and it would be about a year or two later before he was picked up. At the last known location, he was living somewhere in the San Diego, California area. So fast forward about a year and a half or so later, 2008, I believe it was sheriff's deputies in Cathedral City, California, which is right next to Palm Springs. They see this homeless, scuzzy looking transient guy on a bicycle. It's Robert Bowman. And they want to talk to him. Not about this case that I'm talking to you guys about, but they want to talk to him because he's wanted on another case. So they stop him, pull him over, boop, all that stuff, light him up, put him in handcuffs. They take him down to the station. He's under arrest because he has a warrant for whatever crime he committed. And come to find out, they're like, oh, this guy has a murder warrant. So they extradite him back to Toledo, Ohio. He comes down here, and then now homicide. They got the DNA evidence. They'd like to get a confession from him. So he sits down and they start asking him questions. Now, again, they have the DNA. Now, they would rather have his DNA, which they're going to get, and they're going to get him on this case because the DNA is going to match, but they, just to make it, you know, iron tight, they want a confession. So they basically tell him, like, they said, look, your wife told us what happened. Your wife told us that you had this girl captive for probably 2 weeks. You were repeatedly raping her, torturing her. And she told us that you had a white dog. We found a white dog hair on her dress when you dumped her body, when you dumped her remains. We have your DNA on her dress. We'd like a confession so the family can get closure. Now, for the next several hours, this guy is doing nothing but playing a game with detectives. All this pig is doing is he's not denying that he killed her. He's just not admitting it. He's like, I don't know. He basically told him in so many words, it's not my job to say that I did it. It's gonna be your job to prove that I did it. So they place him under arrest. And on October of 2008, he's indicted for the murder of Eileen Adams. Now the family is going to start getting justice. Now, Margaret Bowman takes the stand and says, she repeats verbatim what happened all those years, 45 some odd plus years ago. And Robert Bowman takes the stand in his own defense. He might as well. I mean, what do you got to lose? So this monstrous piece of filth, when the prosecutor is questioning him, he says, you know, you're saying that you couldn't have possibly, you know, that it's our job to prove your guilt. And can you tell the court how your DNA got on the dress of a 14-year-old girl? This guy says, I can't repeat the word because I don't cuss on this channel, but basically he says, my DNA on her dress simply means that I effed her, not that I killed her. Can you imagine hearing that, and you're the family members and you hear this pig talk like that about your sister that was brutalized? I was brutalized. And at the time now, this piece of garbage is 75 years old. He's in ailing health. He's just a defeated old blithering idiot. Well, I don't know why, but the first trial ended in a mistrial. It was a 10-2 verdict of guilt. You need a unanimous decision for all the jurors in Ohio. So 10-2. So two of those jurors, they felt that even though they had DNA evidence linking him, for some unknown reason, I don't know why they voted against not guilt. I'm sure there's something in the court transcript that I didn't catch, but they don't feel that way. So they try him again, and in 2011, he's finally found guilty of murdering Eileen Adams. At that time now, you know, over what would have been almost 45 years ago. This is Eileen's final resting place. She's buried with her grandparents. It's a damn shame that Margaret Bowman just couldn't call the police. I don't care how scared she was. He would have gone to prison for the rest of his life. He might have even had got the death penalty. I don't know what kind of abusive relationship she was in, but anybody in their right mind would have called the police. And because she didn't, this girl had to endure not only those 2 weeks before she was killed in that brutal way, she had to go through the pain and the anxiety and the shame and the pain of what that pig was doing to her. Rest in peace to this young girl. Robert Bowman was convicted of first-degree murder and he was sentenced to life in prison. That is where he died. He died a couple years ago. It doesn't say the exact death date. It just says he's no longer in prison because he's dead. All right, guys. I'm out of here. I'll see you on the next video. Peace out.